Welcome to all of you. I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar. My name is Doug Powe. I'm the director of the Lewis Center, and I'm the James C. Logan Professor of Evangelism in an E. Stanley Jones Chair. I would like my colleague to introduce herself, and then I'll share some more information.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jessica Anschutz. I serve as the co-editor of Leading Ideas and Leading Ideas Talks, and I am a pastor of 3 congregations in Newburgh, New York.
Again, thank you for joining us today. We have some other members of the team that you do not see, but without them, this would not be possible. Raina Villanueva Unger, Kieran Snow Dawson, and Matt Lyons. They are making sure that everything runs smoothly and will be very active throughout. There will be places where we will take questions. If you could please put the questions in the chat, and Matt will then look at the questions and will ask the questions to us, and we'll respond to as many as possible during those times. There will also be a couple of places for participation through surveys. So we look forward to our time together and a time hopefully where we can help you to think about your hybrid experience in some new ways when it comes to evangelism. Let us get started.
Today, we will be talking about hybrid evangelism, and we want to start off thinking about evangelism because so many people view evangelism as a dirty word, a word that brings into consciousness cringeworthy practices. But the reality is we need to reclaim evangelism. Evangelism is important. If we are not intentional about evangelism, how are we sharing the good news? How are we making disciples? How are we reaching new people for Christ? Evangelism is especially important now. Not only are many congregations in a state of decline, but we are emerging, I hope, from 2 years of pandemic life. People are weary, people are frustrated, people are burned out, and people are looking for good news. If you are here for hybrid evangelism, please stay tuned. Before we jump into our discussion of hybrid evangelism, we want to provide a strong foundation for evangelism. Doug.
I want to begin by sharing some characteristics for evangelism. And let me say, of course, there are other characteristics we could talk about, but I believe these 4 characteristics are helpful. The key to evangelism is that it really needs to be relational. Evangelism ultimately is not a numbers game, but it's about how we build authentic relationships with individuals. And these 4 characteristics can really help us to build those authentic relationships. Let's begin by talking about proclamation. Proclamation, of course, is the most common way that we think about evangelism. We think about verbally sharing the gospel or verbally sharing our testimony or story with someone else. But when we usually think about proclamation, we often think of as just the pastor's role to sort of preach or to proclaim. But the reality is, all of us really should be proclaiming and building those relationships with others in some form or fashion. So proclamation, while it is probably the most common way we think about evangelism, it's also probably the one where we struggle the most because most of us don't like to talk about our faith because we see it as personal. Second, let's talk about community. And community is critically important because the body of Christ is supposed to be a unique community. It's a community where everyone is truly valued, where we're all made in the image of God. And this community is supposed to mirror the Trinity, where in the Trinity, they make room for one another's gifts and they make room for sort of the holy dance where they're able to exist together in this sort of wonderful way. There should be something different and unique about a Christian community where people truly are fully loved, even though we are imperfect. The challenge is when our Christian communities simply reflect the community that is outside of the church, then people don't see the difference of why they should become a part of the Christian community. What is it that we are offering that really is unique when it comes to the community we're trying to build? Next is service. So, as Christians, we should not just be concerned with the spiritual being of individuals, we also need to be concerned about their physical well being. The early church really made it a critical piece of what they did to make sure they were taking care of those in need. The Acts 2 sort of community that you find coming together, one of the things they do is to take care of those who are in need. And it says that God added to their number. So making sure that we're not just thinking about the spiritual well being, but we're also thinking about the physical well being of others. And finally, witness. And here, we're really thinking of sort of martyr. And usually, when we hear the word martyr, we're thinking of someone who dies. But in the Greek, martyr really just means to give oneself over fully to something, to give oneself over fully to witnessing. And here, the thinking is that many of us have encountered people who fully give themselves over to the gospel. They embody sort of the gospel in this wonderful way, and you can see it in their daily lives. There's something different about these individuals. But then there are other individuals, and I will put myself in this, falling into this trap sometime, where we sort of become Sunday Christians. That Sunday we think about our Christianity, and then we get busy during the week, and we sort of fall away from embodying the gospel and witnessing in that way we should. So a witness is committed to living every day like it's Sunday. It's sort of becoming that embodiment of the gospel every day of our lives and not just on special occasions. And that's what is critically important. We now want to do a survey and ask you a couple of different survey questions. And we want you to take some time to respond to the poll. We want you to think and answer, what does your congregation do well? And we want you to choose one or two. And what does your congregation need to still work on? And we want you to respond to one or two. So what does your congregation do well? And what does your congregation need to still work on? We're excited to see others are still joining us and putting in the chat where they are from as people continue to answer the poll questions. What does your congregation do well? And what does your congregation need to still work on? We want you to take about, for those of you who have not finished, about 30 more seconds as we get ready to close the poll. And again, think about what does your congregation do well and what does your congregation still need to work on.
As we can see from the poll results, 75% of you shared that service is what you do well, and 66% said fellowship or community, with lower scores in proclamation and witness. And when it comes to what do our congregations need to work on, well, your answers are all over the board. For a lot of you, it is witness. For others, proclamation, and still fellowship and service. So as you can see from these poll results, we have a lot of work to do. Kieran, if we want to move to the next slide. When it comes to the 4 characteristics of evangelism: proclamation, fellowship, service, and witness, in our survey, we saw that we seem to be doing well with fellowship and service. Often, congregations are also proclamation heavy, and many congregations are struggling in areas of community, and we saw in our survey results that there's room for improvement in all 4 of these areas. Few congregations tend to witness well, and that, I think, was our number 1 response in the area that we need to do more work in. When it comes to being effective in evangelism, the key for us is to find balance, to work hard to make sure that our ministries proclaim, that they build fellowship, that they serve the community, and they witness to the faith. Doug.
And I want to pick up on talking about balance. And again, repeat the importance of evangelism being relational, so that all of these characteristics are important. But it's particularly important that we find balance in what we do. And what typically happens is we focus on either proclamation or we focus on service. So there are some congregations that really emphasize verbal sharing, and they put all their work into sharing the gospel by proclaiming it, and they do it extremely well. But they then have the tendency sometimes to forget about meeting the needs of individuals, which is also critically important. But to the other extreme, there are congregations that put all their emphasis in service, and they really think about ways to get out and to take care of people and to do things that will make a difference in people's lives. But then they forget about the importance of proclamation. And they fall into this trap of almost becoming a social agency and not helping people to live into God's reign. So what we're hoping, and what is key and foundational, whether it's in person or in hybrid, which we'll move to in just a minute, is that we find a balance in the way that we do evangelism, that all of these characteristics are critical. And what we have to do is find a giftedness in our community for people to live these out. There are going to be some individuals who naturally are better at proclamation. There are going to be some individuals who certainly are better at service. But there are those individuals who really and truly are great at inviting others into community. And there are those individuals who really have dedicated their lives to almost being sort of a living gospel or an embodiment of the gospel. So one of the things we have to do is to make sure people are working in their gifts so that we can really work to have a balance for these characteristics. I've walked into many congregations where the person who greets you and the person who sort of invites you into the community, that was not their gift. They have done it probably for years, and they feel obligated to come every Sunday and to, you know, live out this ministry, but they really don't have the gift for that ministry. And you can tell that immediately. And when you are experiencing that, that can be a challenge. And as we get to hybrid, it's going to be sort of the same thing. When someone is inviting you to the community digitally, it's important that that person have a gift for doing so. Before we move to hybrid, though, we want to pause here and take any questions you may have as we have sort of set up these 4 characteristics. So please share any questions you may have at this time in the chat.
Hi, Dr. Powe and Dr. Anschutz. I have a question which I'm sure a lot of people are asking about. You spoke about evangelism being the dirty word. What are some practical steps to reclaim it as a positive word?
Dr. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I think one of the first places to start is around education, to actually teach people what evangelism is, in the best possible sense of evangelism. So you can think about incorporating this into Bible studies, worship, teaching about it in small group gatherings, meetings, and other places, and encouraging folks to talk about what their experiences of evangelism are, both the positive and the negative, and then to reclaim those positive examples in our lives and ministry. Doug?
And I would just add to that a couple of things. The first is sort of the root word of evangelism, Evangelion, means good news or sort of a good message. So that evangelism at its root is about how we are sharing the good news with somebody else or a good message with someone else. The reason most people perceive evangelism as a dirty word is they have not received a good message. They've had someone yelling at them or doing something else that feels more abusive than like it is good news. So we need to make sure that we're actually living out what evangelism is and not doing something else that truly is not evangelism. And the other thing is something I've repeated a couple times is that it's relational. So it's not about just simply trying to say, look how we got this person in church and we saved this soul, but it's about how are we authentically building relationships with someone else and taking a journey with them. So when we do that, it doesn't feel like we're just sort of objectifying that individual, but we actually care about the person. Great question. Thanks for asking.
Another question we just received. Can't service be a doorway to proclamation if done properly?
I'll start here. Absolutely. Service can be a doorway to proclamation. Again, the key is balance. So it's not picking one over the other, but it's making sure that we're trying to live into all of the characteristics and making sure that they're all present. So what we don't want to have happen is that we simply do service and there's never any proclamation that goes along with it. But as long as we are balancing what we're doing, any of these could be a doorway into any of the other characteristics. So, Jessica, I don't know if you would like to add.
No, I think it's important to keep in mind that these characteristics overlap with one another. So if you are focusing heavily in one, think about how you can branch into the others, right? How are your ministries of service also opportunities for proclamation? How are your ministries of community building opportunities for witnessing?
All right, we have time for one more question here. This will apply to a lot of congregations. How do you create balance between the 4 characteristics of evangelism in a small congregation?
Let me begin. I think oftentimes when we think small, we think that means that we don't have the resources to do things that larger congregations are doing. But when it comes to evangelism, again, evangelism is about relationship building. And no matter what your size is, you can build relationships with others. Even if it's a small community, you're inviting people to participate in a small community. How many of us have had small community family gatherings where we've just had one or two people? So it's not about the size of the gathering, but it's about how you relate to one another in the gathering. And again, one or two people can share the gospel just like 50 people can share the gospel. So again, size isn't the key component. So what I'm trying to point out is it doesn't matter the number of people of doing it. It's just a matter of making sure that you are sort of relationally living into these characteristics. Jessica, I don't know if you want to add.
I think the place to start in smaller congregations, actually in all congregations, is to assess what you're already doing. And then to look at what you are doing well, and then seek to add on to that to enhance the areas that need improvement.
Let us continue, and now we're going to get into the hybrid portion that most of you probably signed up for the webinar for. And let me begin by saying that the foundation we set is still critical as we think about hybrid ministry. And what we want to start off by thinking about is sort of our need to sort of broaden our understanding of digital ministry. Oftentimes, when we think of digital ministry, we think of sort of streaming our worship service, Facebook or Zoom, YouTube. Um, in some cases, we may even think about maybe a Bible study or something of that nature, but it's really sort of limited to uh, worship typically. And what we want to think about today is, yes, worship is critical and essential because it is a doorway into the congregation, but expanding and broadening the way we think about how we can use digital ministry and how evangelism can remain relational as we use digital ministry. The key is, how are we trying to connect authentically with others, just as we do in person, but we now are going to do it digitally. And we have to think about the role of social media plays in this. And this is in this broadest sense. And then in a second, we will have you think about what social media platforms you're using. And of course, your website plays a key role in how this takes place. The other consideration that we have to think about that's a struggle for many of us is different generations use different social media platforms. When Facebook first came out, it was sort of the hip thing, and it was used by younger people. Now that Facebook has matured, it is now mature people who use Facebook, and you will find younger generations don't really use Facebook. So that different media platforms are used by different generations. So that's something else that we have to think about as we're thinking about our digital ministry. We are not suggesting that you try to do everything at once or that you even use all of the different platforms that are available. But we are suggesting that you really think about your digital ministry evangelism strategy appropriate to your context and to your resources. We now are going to do another survey, and we want to know which digital platforms you are using in your church. If we can go ahead and put the poll up for individuals, so that you will see on here a range of platforms for individuals, starting with sort of Facebook and Twitter, which many individuals are using or familiar with, and then some that some of the younger generations would use, like TikTok, and then some that are sort of in between, like WhatsApp. So we see a range of different platforms here for you to choose from for which platforms you're using. And I just saw in the chat, LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn is one that some do use for those who are subscribers. We'll give everyone another minute. I see that there's a question, and Matt will make sure when we get to the next question period that we can address that issue. I'm laughing at the chat and saying I was trying to be nice and not say old with Facebook. See, if I say old, then I have to include myself in there with all the gray you see in my goatee and everything. So I was being kind to myself also.
So when we look at our survey results, 95% of you are using Facebook in your churches, with YouTube coming in as a second, and then Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, and Reddit less represented. So the important thing to keep in mind here is to remember that with Facebook or with any of these, in using a single digital platform, we're limiting our audience. And so I encourage you to think about ways in which you may expand to other platforms, and also ways you might build connections between the platforms so that you can reach people from multiple generations. So now we're going to talk about the levels of engagement through these platforms. If we take Facebook, the #1 response in our survey, as an example, there are 3 different levels of engagement that people work with Facebook. There are those who are voyeuristic. They scroll through the posts, they look at the photos, they may watch videos or live stream of worship, but they aren't really any more engaged. They aren't commenting, they aren't actively engaging with our ministry on these platforms. The second category is limited engagement. There are those who may engage a virtual worship service at the very beginning of worship. They may be invited to write in the chat and share where they're joining from or how they're doing on a particular day. But then we aren't necessarily engaging them throughout the worship service. So we want to think about how we can move those who are engaged on a limited basis so that they are more fully integrated. Those who are fully integrated, they are active participants through the worship service or ministry activity, whatever it is that we're doing on these digital platforms. They're the ones who are watching, they are listening, they are commenting, they are fully integrated and active participants in our ministry. And the goal, of course, of our work is to become more relational. To remember that just like in-person evangelism, digital engagement is about cultivating those relationships. So as you evaluate how you are using these digital platforms, I encourage you to think about how you can deepen people's engagement while striving to build relationships. So now we're going to take a closer look at each of the 4 characteristics of evangelism, and to think about how we can build on our experiences when it comes to hybrid evangelism. When it comes to ensuring that our hybrid evangelism practices engage in proclamation, it's really important to create space for people to share their faith in virtual places and spaces. It has been my experience that people in the pews often feel inadequate or unprepared to share their faith. In his book, Your Church Can Thrive, Harold Percy outlines a simple outline for sharing our faith. I like to think of it as faith sharing in 3 chapters, and the chapters are different for those who have been raised in the church compared to those who came to relationship with Christ later in their lives. First, let's take a look at those 3 chapters for those who have been a Christian for most or all of their lives. The first chapter is to talk about your early Christian influences in your life. Who shaped your faith? The second is the story of making your faith your own. How did you come to claim that faith? For some, that may have been the process of confirmation, or there may be a particular moment or experience where they truly embodied that faith. And then the final chapter in that story is to talk about your life with Christ. How is your life different because of your relationship with Jesus Christ? When it comes to those who came to Christ later in life, the 3 chapters are a little bit different. The first would be to describe your life before turning to Christ. What was your life like? What did you think about? What did you do? How did you behave? The second chapter is to tell the story of how you met Christ. And then the third chapter is to share about your life with Christ today. What's different now because of this relationship? Once you have these outlines and once you have equipped your people with these outlines, you can adapt and expand your faith story depending on the particular circumstance. The outline provides a framework for a 30-second elevator conversation, a longer conversation over lunch, or a recording of your faith story to be shared on social media. I invite you to consider how you can share the stories of people from your congregations more widely. And not only share stories, but then invite people to engage in your social media platforms to share their own stories. You might consider inviting 1 or 2 people to share their faith at the beginning of a meeting or during a testimony time of worship and to record them and then to share them on your various social media platforms. The reality is that the more people practice, the more comfortable they will become with sharing their faith. The season of Lent begins tomorrow. So how might you engage your congregation in proclamation throughout the Lenten journey? There are plenty of opportunities for clergy and laity to share meditations during Lent, reflections on their faith journey on the various social media platforms. I encourage you to think about how you might share and then invite other people to share their stories. What if your congregation released an Instagram post or a YouTube or Facebook video with one person sharing their faith journey each week, and then inviting others to respond in the comments or to post their own videos and their own stories? There are many opportunities during the Lenten season and beyond to engage your congregation in proclamation. Doug.
Let's keep building on sort of that participation and those levels of voyeuristic, limited, or deeper engagement that Jessica shared as we think about community. As we build community through a digital means, we're often thinking about hosting small groups, hosting a Bible study, possibly inviting people to participate in some form of like a coffee fellowship that I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But the idea is to think about ways to move beyond just simply streaming worship to how we can construct community. Now, I want to be clear. You are creating community in worship. That's absolutely true. The challenge with simply streaming worship is that worship can simply be voyeuristic depending on sort of that level of engagement that you may have, or it might be limited on Facebook where people are at least are in the comments. So what we're trying to do in building community are find ways to deepen those relationships and get to know people at a sort of different level. So a couple of ways to do this is to think about some form of a study, Bible study, a book study that's related to a Bible theme, where you can invite people who may be in person and who have only connected with you virtually to connect through something like Zoom, where you can get to know one another and then have an opportunity to sort of deepen those relationships with one another in that smaller group setting. So you are building community in that way. Another way to do this is thinking about a sort of coffee time where you would just have an opportunity to sort of share your stories with one another. So if we think about the sort of in-person coffee hour, this would be a play off of that coffee hour, but done again on a different social media platform where people can share their stories and get a chance to really to know one another. The key in building community is thinking about ways that you can get to know other people and to deepen that relationship, even when you may not see them in person. And with the various sort of platforms we have today, there are various ways and possibilities for doing this that can help you to get to know someone better, but also help us to do some of the practices we were doing in person, such as the coffee hour or the Bible study, that we can invite more people to participate or have different types of groups participating. Jessica's going to share an idea for how this can even work as we think about Lent.
So if we can go back to the previous slide, this picture depicts the social justice stations of the cross from New Paltz United Methodist Church, which they did last year. They presented these large banners on the church lawn, and on each banner, there's a QR code that linked back to their website that had a lot more information. And so they were able to share this journey not only with people locally in their community, but also throughout the world, and to anybody who came in person through their website, which had corresponding information. But the website didn't stop there. It also encouraged visitors to the website to add their own ideas and their own input. So they were linking what they were doing on the ground to their virtual community so that all people had access to this idea. Another idea as you journey through Lent would be to encourage your congregation to post a photo each day or perhaps each week of Lent, focusing on a particular practice of discipline of the Lenten journey. And then as you celebrate Easter, you can encourage your congregation to share photos where they see resurrection happening. You can use apps like Instagram, Facebook, or even WhatsApp if you want to share more within your community of faith. There are lots of opportunities. And again, I remind you to keep in mind that since different generations have an affinity for different apps, you might think about how you can share across social media platforms in order to create interpersonal or intercongregational dialogue. So you might take a photo that's shared on Instagram or WhatsApp and post it to your Facebook page, or share a video from TikTok on YouTube so that more people have access to it. Doug.
Let us talk about service. And service, of course, is the one that rated highly for how we engage others. And service is critically important. As we think about service, one of the first places to start where we can engage those in digital sort of platforms is praying for the work that we're doing, praying for our communities, prayer. Everyone can participate in prayer. If we go back to the days before sort of social media, someone was talking about me being old earlier. I remember days when we would have the old phone prayer line. So this is just another version of doing that, but it can be done through social media now, where you can do it in social media platforms where you don't necessarily have to see each other, but you can also come together in those platforms where you can see each other and still do prayer for the community, those things as part of your service. More hands-on service can be something like tutoring. And tutoring is something that can be done that does not require someone to even be in your same state. Someone could be in California and literally tutor someone who is in DC, even though there is a time difference between those two places. So tutoring is one of those things that allows, again, an effort for people to come together and to engage in service virtually or through a digital platform, even though they may not be in the same place or the same space, and can have a tremendous impact on the lives of other individuals. So the key, again, is sort of finding those places and the things that you're doing and the platform that is appropriate for what you're doing, so that you can still engage in service, not only in person, but engage in service in some of these digital ways. One of the ones that younger individuals use is TikTok. There are some, of course, concerns with TikTok that have been highly sort of publicized in the media, but TikTok also can be used in a way that can be helpful. If you, for example, have a food pantry, one of the ways you can use TikTok is sort of what they call a time lapse. So you can sort of do a day in your food pantry with, of course, appropriate videos where you're not taking advantage of people who might be coming to the food pantry. But you sort of take videos of sort of the day of the ministry, and what will happen is TikTok will take that and sort of um, pull it together where it becomes sort of a 3-minute sharing of what a day in your food pantry ministry looks like, so that people can see the work you're doing through that ministry. You can also do sort of a question and answer where people may ask you questions about your food pantry, and it gives you an opportunity to answer to them and get in video, which gives an image again to the work that you're doing. So some of these these newer applications that younger people are using can also be extremely helpful in the work that you're doing for service, as you think about possibly broadening the way that you're trying to connect with others. Jessica?
When it comes to being a witness and hybrid ministry, we have to embody a different way of being together. We have to make a commitment to treat a person who engages virtually and to care about their well-being in the same way we do with those who gather together in person. In other words, we have to focus on building relationships, making sure people are okay, and helping facilitate personal connections. Keep in mind that our digital presence needs to be authentic to our in-person gatherings. For example, we can't present a digital presence that says we are feeding 5,000 people a week and have a wonderful feeding ministry when in reality we're only feeding 50 people. We must have integrity in what we do and make sure that what we are presenting is authentic to who we are and what we are trying to embody, so that our digital presence and our in-person presence are embodying the same witness. I encourage you to think about how you share photos and information about your ministries. Think about pictures of the feeding ministry. Be sure not to only feature the table that is full. Show pictures of tables that also have empty seats if the reality is that you have empty seats. Put your best foot forward, but be authentic, and be sure to have permission before posting photos of people. I also encourage you to work to connect people who are engaging digitally with your ministry to your in-person events. If you are having a meal, you might consider setting a place at each table to represent those who are joining virtually, with some sort of reminder or note card or picture reminding guests that there is a larger and wider community. You can also invite those who are gathered in person to share about their experience at the meal on social media, or even to write a note that could be mailed to someone who is unable to be present in person, but that could be mailed to them after the event to help connect them back to the meal. So be intentional about creating space for those who are connecting digitally, and be sure to make space for and to include everyone. Doug?
Let's think about some best practices for engaging in these digital platforms. Let me first begin again by repeating that what is critically important is being relational. And as we think about expanding beyond streaming, so we haven't talked a lot about sort of streaming your worship service, because we know that many of you are already doing that in some form or fashion. So thinking about expanding beyond that, as you think about new ministries or ministries where you do not have a digital presence, think about which one of the platforms may be appropriate for that ministry. And are there individuals that could help you to build a digital presence in that ministry that could be relational, and then, of course, be evangelistic? So think about sort of expanding to some other ministry areas and building a digital presence. The next thing to think about is how do we deepen our connection? So, as you are possibly having people who may follow what you're doing on Facebook, or people may follow you through a different platform, are you responding to these individuals in chat? Are you trying to create a conversation with them? Now, some of them may not want a conversation, and that is okay, but some of them may want some form of engagement. And again, one of the ways to engage is simply to ask, is there anything we can pray for you during this week or during this day? So engaging and responding to people in the chat to sort of deepen that level of engagement to help build relationships is really important and key. Then think about as you're engaging them, what's next? How do you connect them to something you're doing in the future? Do you connect them to a sort of coffee hour fellowship? Do you connect them to one of your book or Bible studies? So think about how you can connect them again to keep that relationship going. Critical for best practices is really assessing what digital platforms you are using and who can run those platforms for you, so that you really have a sense of um, what is appropriate for you in your context. And then a reminder again about the characteristics of proclamation, community service, and witness, and how those are foundational to what you're trying to do, even in a digital world. Let us now take questions again.
Dr. Powe and Dr. Anschutz, I have two that are related here, so I'm going to ask them both together. There are concerns about safety of using social media, especially with children and youth, and abuse or inappropriate relationships. How do you as a congregation model healthy use and also encourage relationships with various generations? And related, how do we get to those who do not want to be online in any way, shape, or form? This person is actually staying away from worship because they do not want to be seen singing in the choir. It feels like by forging ahead, we are leaving them in the dust.
Jess, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll start off reflecting a little bit on safety. I think it's really, and it's a great question, first of all, and important for us to think about. If your congregation has a safe sanctuary policy or some sort of policy for protections for children and vulnerable adults, I encourage you to review that policy, evaluate it, and make sure that you have standards in place and expectations and guidelines in place for digital engagement. It's also important to do education with people about safe engagement on digital platforms. So make sure that you have guidelines in place, enforce those guidelines. And the other, thinking about the other question about folks who don't want to engage online, I encourage you to think about, again, we talked about having space. So creating space where those people can safely gather if they don't want their face or their presence to be shown online. There are any number of reasons why this may be the case for people, and it's really important when it comes to hospitality that we create these safe spaces. So it may be that there is a worship service that isn't streamed or isn't available online. It may be that there's a special area of the sanctuary where folks who don't want to be pictured are invited and encouraged to sit. So think about those things. I don't know, Dr. Powe, you may have something to add.
Yes, just a couple of things to build up on what you've already said is I know some congregations actually have people sign off on whether they're willing to be on video or not on video, and have their children on video or not on video, so that you're getting consent for those individuals to do so. So I think that is a practice that can be very helpful. I also think in terms of the person in the choir, there are a couple of things that can be helpful. One is to think about, even in the same service, there might be one or two selections, depending on how many you do, that you would not show necessarily the choir but you would show maybe those who are in the congregation that have given consent singing, so that person could participate in that case. So I think there's going to have to be some creativity and flexibility that takes place, because this is new and we're moving into sort of some new territory for many individuals. So just sort of thinking about those things in some different ways, I think will be helpful. Someone asked about an example of a church. I think one church that does this well and sort of has done this well for a period of time is Impact United Methodist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, that really makes wonderful use of sort of digital ministry in the work they do. So I would recommend that you sort of check them out, check out their website and the work they're doing.
Another question, which I'm sure will resonate with a lot of congregations. What about those with multiple churches in a very rural community with poor or little internet access? How do we do hybrid in that situation?
Dr.
Anschutz, again, I know you've actually experienced some of this. I'll let you.
I have experienced it. I think first you have to see what is possible, right? If I serve 3 congregations, 2 out of the 3 are fairly well connected to the internet. 1 out of the 3 is not. And so it was really important for us when we were doing virtual worship to use Zoom or free conference call so that folks had the option to call in because they were not connected via computer, smartphone, that sort of thing. So when you think about hybrid evangelism, you want to be able to reach the people in your community, but it doesn't make sense to have a strong, vibrant YouTube ministry if most of the people in your community can't access YouTube. So think about building on what people are using and what you have and what's accessible. So it may be that your hybrid ministry is more limited strictly because of the internet connections in your community. So you may be focused more on person to person or phone ministries, things like that.
And part of building your plan is thinking about sort of what your goal is. And this is true for rural congregations also. So is the goal simply to connect with people who are in that rural community through your digital platform? Or is the goal to expand and connect with others who may be outside of the rural community with your digital platform? So I think that's a question you need to ask yourself and really wrestle with. There's no right or wrong answer. And if you're trying to connect with people outside, then you have to start thinking about, does that mean we have to be creative and go someplace else where there is a stronger connection, that we can think about hosting some sort of coffee hour fellowship or Bible study fellowship, or where we can connect with other people, or we video, in this case, maybe our worship service. And when we get again to someplace that's stronger, then we upload it where it could then be played for others to view. And then if someone follows up in the chat with the comments that may come in with individuals. So again, that creativity is really important in those cases.
Another question, a great one. We have a number of people who watch our YouTube worship and they watch it on their TVs, which means they can't chat. We have no idea who they are. Are there good practices that churches are already using to help encourage these folks to connect with the church in a further way? We've yet to be successful in engaging online folks into other digital offerings.
Yeah, great question. And again, there's no easy or simple answer to this question. A couple of things that some congregations have done that has helped is asking those individuals, and not everyone will do this, if they're willing to share their email so that you can follow up with them after the worship experience. So just, come out and asking and say, we know you're out there watching. We would like to connect with you and just share some of the other ministries and things we're doing. Do you mind sharing your email with us? So just being upfront and asking. The other is also trying to be very intentional about making sure that you are presenting the other opportunities to connect digitally to them, because sometimes something will catch their eye and they will connect with one of those opportunities, which will then give you a chance to make that connection with them. But those are the two things that I have seen most congregations do.
All right, another question. Some folks seem to feel evangelism doesn't take place without biblical quotes, such as the Roman Road. How would you address this, and how important is quoting scripture in evangelism?
Everyone has to do it sort of authentically to themselves. The honest answer is, if you're actually talking to someone who is not a Christian, quoting scripture probably is not going to be helpful, because they're not going to know what it is you're saying. They're going to be more interested sort of in your own sort of personal story and, what has made a difference in your life, and talking about sort of God in that way, than just simply quoting scriptures to them. So I think we have to remember that when we're quoting scripture, we're sort of making an assumption that people already know what we're sort of talking about and what we're saying. And if it's really someone who is not a Christian or outside of the church, that may not be the case. So that starting at a different place in that instance actually may be more helpful. Duncan, do you want to add?
I think the other thing that may be helpful is just thinking about and broadening people's understanding and experience of evangelism. So having some conversation around it, and perhaps trying to discern, less focusing on why they think scripture is important, but broadening their mindset to see that there may be situations where scripture is important, but other situations where evangelism may be more effective without scripture.
All right, we have another question, actually asking your thoughts that just came in. Would creating a contact capture page be something worth investing, directing that traffic and impressions like a landing page for your church? Could this be a roundabout way to revitalize our online presence?
Duncan, would you like to start in this case?
I think it's a great idea, especially if you think about, on a YouTube video, you could have a QR code that folks could scan that could then lead to a page on your website if your congregation has a website. I think the other part of this is to just be sure that you are inviting people to connect, invite them to connect, direct them to the ways that they connect, and to repeatedly make those invitations, and to make it easy for them to share information. So a contact capture page is a great way to do that.
I just say ditto.
All right. You can't say ditto to this one. Will we really need a digital component when the pandemic is over?
Absolutely. The world has shifted, and it is going to be changed forever as we move forward, and was changing even before the pandemic happened. But the reality is now, if you look at trends, that the numbers are up to 10 to 20% of individuals have become comfortable connecting in a digital way to congregations and are not going to go back to in person. So even to maintain those individuals who used to come in person, you're going to need some sort of a digital presence, more than likely, to connect with them. Now, is that going to be 100% true? Absolutely not. But for many congregations that is going to become their reality. So finding ways to navigate and figure out what works for you will be critically important.
All right. Well, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Dr. Powe and Dr. Anschutz, thank you so much. If any of you have any more questions, just please still send them along and I will direct them to Dr. Powe and Dr. Anschutz afterward. If you'd like to learn more about evangelism, the Lewis Center has many, many resources to help you. Now, I will send this information to you, so there's no need to write it down, but you can visit our website at churchleadership.com. You can join 20,000 church leaders and subscribe free to Leading Ideas, our free e-newsletter. And you can check out our free 50 Ways tip sheets, which are some of our most popular resources by far. And we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel for Leading Ideas Talks podcast. We value your feedback, and we ask that you complete an evaluation at churchleadership.com/evaluation. I will also type the link into the chat. Your feedback helps us build a better webinar. So thank you for completing an evaluation. And thank you so much for attending. I will send you an email with the resource list and the presentation slides. We have recorded this video, and once we have it cleaned up, we will send the video to you. And again, just please complete an online evaluation at churchleadership.com/evaluation. Your thoughts really do matter. And from all of us at the Lewis Center, thank you so much for participating in hybrid evangelism, the new reality for congregations. We hope to see you again soon at other Lewis Center webinars, and blessings to you all.